We got another exciting episode ahead of us, and today I reached out to a friend of mine, and we met a few times, not too many. We've been in touch over social media and such for quite some time. We actually met the first time back in 2016 in Stockholm at this kind of outdoors fair, a big exhibition in Stockholm, a big venue, right? And we took a few photos and so on, but never could I have imagined that he would one day be a guest in my very own podcast. So today's guest is, and I will read to you, Fredrik Sträng is a Swedish adventurer and mountaineer renowned for his daring expeditions to some of the world's most challenging peaks. With a passion for exploration and a thirst for adventure, Fredrik has submitted numerous mountains, including Everest and K2, the second highest peak on Earth. And his remarkable journey is a testament to perseverance and courage in the face of adversity. So join us on the Quest podcast as we delve into Fredrik's captivating stories of triumph and resilience, and about exploring the depth of the human spirit and the thrill of high altitude adventure. So if that sounds exciting to you, it sure sounds exciting to me. Join this podcast and listen to Fredrik. He has lots and lots of things to share and lots of value to share, okay? Stay strong, listen to the podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Are you tired of guessing whether your diet is truly working for you? Say goodbye to uncertainty and welcome a new era of nutritional clarity. It's time to shift from guesswork to evidence-based nutrition. Picture this. It's 2016 and I'm gearing up for some serious endurance challenges, crossing Iceland by mountain bike and tackling my very first Ironman in Kalmar, Sweden. But I had a problem. Past injuries lingered and I needed to optimize my health for peak performance, from immune support to muscle function and heart health. Enter the balance oil. Since 2016, it's been my secret weapon, delivering consistent results that I can trust. But let's rewind a bit. What sets balance oil apart? It's not just another omega-3 supplement, it's a game changer backed by science. With a simple finger prick test, I gained insights into my essential fatty acid levels, thanks to a state-of-the-art lab in Norway. The results, eye-opening. Turns out most of us suffer from a severe imbalance between the omega-3s and omega-6, a key factor in cellular function. The solution, the balance oil. The balance oil is formulated with polyphenols, potent antioxidants that preserves its freshness and efficacy. This isn't just about popping pills or taking an oil, it's about bioavailability, ensuring your body absorbs and utilizes every single drop. My journey with the balance oil didn't stop at the first test. With regular follow-ups, I've been seeing my ratios improve, paving the way for optimal health and performance. And now I'm thrilled to share this life-changing product with you. So are you curious about your own levels, if your diet works? Take the guesswork out of your diet and discover the balance oil. Plus, as a premier customer, you enjoy exclusive discounts up to 60% and personalized supports from your truly. Ready to unlock your full potential? Click the link in show notes under balance oil and test-based nutrition and join me on the path to better health. This is quite a special episode, I would say, because today I have the pleasure of having a special guest. And it's not, like all guests are special guests, obviously, right? But I remember when I sort of grew up, to be honest, and there were specifically sort of two Swedish adventurers I was following, right? And I looked up to them and I read a lot about their topics as well. One was actually Ola Skinnamo, skiing in Antarctica, right? So I read a lot about Antarctic expeditions and, Shackleton and Amundsen and Scott and all of these things. And I was, fascinated by all of these things. And the other guy was a mountaineer, a climber. And I was very, fascinated about mountains and mountain climbing and heading up, into the Himalayas and all of these things. And now like personally, I never been much of I'm afraid of heights. I never been much into heading into the mountains either. I've been more about hiking and endurance and cycling and running and ultra running and pushing myself to the limits. I never really been into I want to climb those mountains, but however, I always felt fascinated about the topic itself, and I never really said no either. So maybe who knows? Like in the future, I might be one of them, right? But today's guest is Fredrik Sträng, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you on my podcast, The Quest. And the podcast as well is about it's a podcast about reaching your goals and working towards your goals. And it's also a podcast, very interestingly enough, like this, what we do now, like the talking points is kind of secondary. What I want to inspire my listeners to is to take action. That is primary, right? So the idea of the podcast itself is to inspire the listeners to take action. So hopefully listening to this podcast, maybe even hopefully they listen to half of this podcast and then they sort of shut down the podcast and they head out and I don't know, climb a mountain or something, right? So that's my aspiration. That is my hope. And today I was thinking, obviously it will be very interesting to hear your story. Like Fredrik Sträng, who are you? Like, I know about you. We met, we talked and we met a few times, but many people out there, they don't really know anything about who is this guy? Who is Fredrik Sträng? Like, who are you? Where are you from? Why do you do what you do? Maybe that is where we can begin. So welcome to the podcast, Fredrik. Who are you?
Thank you, Erik.
What do you do? And where are you? Yeah, what are you about?
Thank you, Erik. It's a pleasure being on board. And there was many things initially when you spoke that intrigued me, and something that you emphasized was perhaps in the middle of this podcast, people will feel the urge to just quit and head out and do whatever, ski, run, paddle, whatever, as long as there's an activity. And I would be honored, I would be delighted if that could be the case. But hopefully, we'll reach the end, and as the listeners will indulge in the stories and who I am, what I do, will feel somehow empowered so they can tackle their own Mount Everests. So the first question, I think it's a very sincere question, and it's sometimes for me a bit hard to divulge. Who am I? I think that it needs a brief introduction to my past. And I was grown up in perhaps the flattest part in Sweden called Närke, where many people go by the saying it's never too late to give up. I think that's a derogatory mindset. From that uh, was the inception of I think um, a revolt, and I think that it introduced me to think differently because I had this belief that I could combat my fear of heights, my notoriously being afraid of death, etc., by giving the attention to training and preparations. And I was always been fascinated about mountains. I can't say that I am immune to either fear of heights or imposter syndromes, etc. I am a human being that needs a lot of training to overcome fear, and I have a lot of self doubt. Believe it or not, it takes me bold action and a lot of tremendous effort to pull me and push me through those debilitating belief sets. And I think that's perhaps something that I was bestowed upon since my childhood, because I was grown up in a place where you shouldn't think high of yourself. You should fall in line and don't speak up and just follow the system. And I think that is very sad. I think that perhaps my greatest fear was believing how good I could be. Uh, and now, when I have achieved to some people great many feats, I've come to a certain age where I start to question, was I good enough? Did I do enough? And this shadow of scrutiny that comes when you trying to justify whether or not the life that I built was worth it is sometimes quite difficult. It's hard. It puts a toll on you because there are many missteps that I made in the past that I wish I could remedy, that I could rewrite. For one thing, for instance, is that I never went to university.
Mm.
I, in hindsight, do regret that I didn't take that seriously enough. I remember it so clearly. I was supposed to go to the Royal KTH, Royal School of Technology in Stockholm, and it was the inauguration. And the day before, I just said, "Blow it! I'll climb," and I continued climbing. The second year climbing, I was accepted it once again to material physics and becoming a civil engineer. And I refused to go as well. And now, decades later, I'm sitting here and thinking perhaps I could have combined both my mountaineering career with an actual education. But I think that we can think about such things for many things. I mean, why didn't we go into Bitcoin when it was in inception in 2009? Everyone would have been millionaires by now. And it's easy to think about and being regretful. And unfortunately, that doesn't kick us out from our cryosleep and our regrets and feeling self pity. So I'm trying to deal with acceptance, and that's a hard thing to me, to accept things, because I have endured and seen many of my friends die in the mountains, to a staggering number of 36 people so far. And those have been close to me, people that I've had the honor to call them my friend. And certainly that shakes your disease, that shakes your and steer up your world and your perception about things. And I understand that I'm vulnerable. I am not um, uh, bestowed with superhuman powers. I am fragile, and I can perish. That's why I am a person who um, appreciate the small things in life, because at any moment life can be ripped apart and it can be taken from us. So I try to live day to day, but I also try to plan for the future. But I don't put too much emphasis on making great, grandiose plans, 10 years plans, etc. I try to go from one goal to another and trying to devote myself wholeheartedly to that endeavor. And so I think, answering your question, probably the longest answer yet, is that I'm a hardworking soul that I appreciate life, and I try to see good things in bad things, and I try to be a constant reminder to myself that I am constantly evolving and that life is a gift, and it shouldn't be taken for granted.
Thank you for that answer, Fredrik. It's also a beautiful answer, by the way. I'm thinking, like, just to, and I'm sure you will mention this, but you've been to Everest, right? And you've been to K2, I think, right? And other mountains as well. And you talk about being vulnerable, taking one day at a time, being fragile. But I imagine maybe many people see you as a superhuman because you've been to all these mountains, right? And you climbed all of these mountains, and you sort of, maybe even you go your own way, Like you don't do the regular like 9 to 5 routine as most people do, and they have the 9 to 5 and work and school and going coming back home and making dinner and all of these things. Instead, you're like charging up the mountains as a superhuman. So there's a dissonance, maybe, perhaps, between like how you actually live and how people see you.
Oh yeah, I mean, oh, clearly, I mean, I've had the opportunity and fortune in interviewing quite a lot of prominent adventurers around the globe in my own podcast. And something that is striking to me is that the more you experience, the more you see real life, and the more you encounter the hardships in life, the more vulnerable and I think appreciative you are for the very small things, because you understand the impermanence of everything. And I don't think that I've encountered any great, respectful, and renowned people who is, bragging or think they're too good. They can't even stand themselves because they're so good. I think I haven't encountered that kind of mentality. People are in general, when you speak to them, very humble, and it's a humbling experience that I'm going through every time I set out to scale one of these giant, formidable peaks. I sit down on my knees in front of a stupa, which is a small stone temple which is created to oblige the gods. And I'm not religious. I'm utterly atheist. And but I think there's something reassuring and comforting with the practice of prayer, because it instills a certain set of mindsets where you are forged into focusing diligently on the task and not diverting from the path. And from that, um, it 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 what emerges from that prayer is a focus and concentration while you're on the mountain. That every step can be this last in your life. So you are not thinking about whether or not you forgot to close the door at home, or if you left your um, pan boiling in the kitchen. You are here and now, complete and utter mindfulness. And I think that is such a beautiful way of living, being in the present. And all these people who have had the luxury, and you, including you, I mean, the adventures you've done, which are impressive, I think you can relate to this particular feeling where you are completely absorbed by the presence of life, and nothing else distracts you from that path. And you get into a certain position where you want to grab and hold on to that feeling, and you are afraid of losing it. And when you're coming home after an adventure for maybe 2 or several months, you are in a bliss, in a state of bliss, in a complete bliss, where everything is so simple and easy. All the cumbersome things that people endure on their commute transportation from A to B in the morning to their job seems to you being ridiculous, and it's so um, uh, it's so perishable. Uh, and I think that that's a bit scary, because you can get addicted to this kind of thing. And somehow I have I've not been an adrenaline junkie, definitely not, and I never will be. I am a uh, person who advocates safety above all, but I think it's easy to be sucked in and be sort of addicted by this bliss, where nothing else matters than just being at the present moment. It could be in the climb, it could be biking along the lower 40s, crossing United States from west to east. It could be paddling over an ocean, etc. Because you feel that no one can dictate and no one can control your emotions and your state. You're in total control. But in the society, we're bombarded with so many fragments of impulses and attention grabbing uh, 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 um, commercialism that's trying to tell you to be this or that, that it's hard to navigate. But climbing is easy. Climbing, dying. I mean, it's one Alaskan person said once, uh, uh, dying is easy. Everything else is hard. And I think that quite the opposite when it comes to climbing. Well, climbing is definitely hard, but it's also easy because the task is going from A to B, and everything else, taxes, parking tickets, taking school to kindergarten, whatever, shopping list for the food you're gonna buy for the week, etc. There's so it's so blissful. So you well, I can go on and talk about this, but I think in general it's a bliss, and it's being humble. It's a very good step forward to appreciate life.
Yeah. So I will ask you, let's see if I can combine this. I will ask you a question and then I will keep on talking. Like Fredrik, you were into this when at the beginning of the podcast. So the question would be, and then I will just continue talking, but maybe let's see where this ends up. But are you afraid of missing out? And then I mean, because I hear what you say, I understand what you say, and I can I feel what you say, because that is my experience as well. When I take my bike, I take the flight to LA, then I start to bike to New York. Life, I mean, as you say, it's hard because I bike 180K a day. Like my longest day was like 270K. And then I just go on and on and on, day after day after day, right? And I have to navigate by myself. I have to check the maps, maybe I have flat tire, mechanical issues, finding food, all of these things. I don't have a crew, I don't have a van, it's just me. But life becomes very easy. Like I don't think about bills or if I need to, whatever happens at my place or what goes on in Sweden. Like it's super simple. Like it's a bliss, right? And then maybe I listen to music or a podcast or whatever, and maybe it's like it rains a lot. I have headwind. Doesn't really matter. I'm like in the moment, and I know I will be in the moment, and I thoroughly enjoy it. But then again, maybe as you say, then I get back home to Sweden, and then what pops into my mind is my next adventure, right? So I start to prepare my next adventure. I do the fitness and training and logistics, and I try to build my business and the plans and do all of these things while I might see friends and family, and they do kind of what most people do, They go to the dinners and hang out and drink beer, and maybe they're hungover, and they live life, while I tend to be focused on my projects, right? So I can experience sometimes that, maybe I should like I love to maybe next adventure is like biking across Japan, but maybe I should take it slower. Maybe I should skip it, even, maybe I should just go to the pub and be like everyone else. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's many things I can counter on what you're raising here, but why? I mean, inevitably, why should we change? I mean, and unless there's nothing dysfunctional with the lifestyle that you have, that it inflicts suffering and pain to others, which I doubt, heavily doubt, or if it invokes suffering and pain to yourself. I don't think you're hurting yourself by doing these trips. Definitely, I think they are altogether very empowering and elevate your life. And so do I think about my adventures. But there's also another dimension. When you are in hazardous environments, you also have to put in the objective danger and the possibility for something to really go haywire. And that is ultimately when you climb 8,000-meter peaks, it's in treacherous environment where you have avalanches, rockfall, which you cannot completely predict. And the unpredictability, I think, is something that evokes a lot of fear and controversial and doubt to people, controversy and doubt to people, and they confront you and confront me with these thoughts. How can you be so irresponsible to your family? I mean, I don't have children, so they congratulate me for that. But there are a lot of people who combine this job in being in the mountains as guides, and I'm an aspiring mountain guide, and I will hopefully, inshallah, take people to the mountains as long as my knees will carry me, and I won't stop. But you have to evaluate your risk acceptance, and certain places on Earth and certain spots, they are undoubtedly more riskier than others, and you just have to know your level, because sometimes people venture into areas where they don't have the physique or the necessary skill sets to handle the adversities. And I am a person who has always been of uh, the 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 thesis that if I travel into an area or if I jump on board a project, I have to be a little bit better, and maybe not only a little bit, but a lot more better than just barely making it. I have to have some extra juice in order to handle consequences and unforeseen things. And for that reason, I train like a maniac. I train twice a day still, and I don't see an end to it, because I know that my physique is my strength. That is my safety net and my return ticket. If I have good physique, I can be a better. I'm also better mentally, and I think climbing mountains is mainly a mental game. But I think you're not missing out, man. You're you're doing the right thing. But I can relate. Sometimes I have FOMO. Sure as hell I have some FOMO. Sometimes I wonder and I question, what am I doing? Am I really missing out the big picture here? Should I have done something differently? Of course, those thoughts pop up, but they dissipate quite quickly.
Agreed. Yeah. So I've been thinking about it along the same lines for quite some time, right? So my conclusion have not always necessarily, but when I go on the long bike journeys, am I fleeing from something, or am I going towards something, right? And I wasn't sure for a long time, but until I actually realized I'm not fleeing from anything. I'm actually going towards something. So like the branding and the Primal Swede and all of these things, it's not necessarily that I build a business that needs to create all of this revenue and stuff. Rather, it's kind of an expression of who I am. That's it. So that is, I need to do these things in order to, live life to the full extent possible, and I love it. So I see no reason to change. Right?
Good on you. I
Yeah.
congratulate you from doing that. And why shouldn't we? We are constantly bombarded from commercial inputs that you can be anything you want and you can do anything you want, which is somewhat dualistic. In one hand, it's true. In the other hand, it requires a lot more than tenacity and determination. It requires also some sort of endorsements from people in power. Somehow you are interlinked with other people's endorsements and their recommendations. That's what I've experienced, and especially when you climb these giant peaks. I could not possibly do this without sponsorship, for instance.
Yeah.
I couldn't afford it. So I am in great favor of all the sponsors that have provided the necessary means for me to embark on these adventures. And without getting in contact with these people, it could have simply have been a dream. But now it materialized, and that was due to a lot of persistence and perseverance, and also uh, uh, obviously delivering some sort of commercial value to the sponsors. So I mean, you can be happy. I can be happy without climbing those giant 8,000-meter peaks. I think that's important, because if you come to a stage where 8,000-meter peaks is your only road to happiness, then I think it's getting sketchy, because then perhaps you would risk too much and end up in a very bad spot.
Yeah, agreed. You know, it's a life balance. Like I often think, okay, I could, you know, sell stuff, get funding funds, and then I could do this biking across Africa or something, right? But like physically, I could do it. Mentally, I could probably do it, but I wouldn't feel emotionally able to do it, I believe, unless I also feel like I have other things in my life in order, right? Like family, friends, relationships, all of these things. And I kind of regard when I do like an adventure, that is just the tip of the iceberg. So many other pieces need to be in place in order for me to able to do that. Kind of like you were saying, Fredrik, on fitness and these things, right? It's like, okay, if I leave this desk and I head up into Everest, I will probably have problems, right? So I need to put things in place first. Like, okay, so I need to feel healthy. I need to work on my maybe diet, fitness, go to the gym, endurance training. Like so many things need to be in place. And that takes, as you said as well, like resilience and grit and determination and goal setting and a mindset. And as you say as well, you know, okay, you can do an Ironman and it's like physically you move, but in order to actually move, you need to decide first that you actually want to move. So it's like a 99.99% mind game going on all the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Now there's all these demons that are flying around
They are
trying
plenty
to.
of them.
Oh yeah, yeah, and the procrastination and settle for less is a constant barrier to our desired goals. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of people, unfortunately, and including myself, sometimes accept that I'm never gonna get there, so I might as just enjoy daydreaming and be satisfied with the things I've got. And speaking of which, I mean, some of my dreams has always been studying and becoming smarter than I am, and always been fascinated by film and astronomy. They're very two different, very two different things, but perhaps I have the brains to conclude that. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. But it takes a lot of grit, as you said, and resilience, and you get slapped in the face and end up in the gutter a lot. But
Yeah.
you have to raise your time every time you fall. I mean, our success is not defined by not ever falling, but rising every time we fall.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I'm gonna ask you something about climbing and stuff as well. But I like we talked a bit about risk. And agreed, like I'm not in mountains, but you know, if I bike across a country or a continent, you know, things might happen on a bike, traffic and stuff. So I always do like a risk assessment like before I take off, right? I want to be prepared. What happens if my bike break down, if I have an accident, if I break my leg, on these things, like backup plans. So that is why when I go running here, I always usually have like a vest or backpack or something with extra gear, and most people don't. Like in case something happens, I'm just around in the neighborhood. It's like a damage I have, you know, from the what I do. But many people, I believe, or they say, okay, it's so risky to do, this biking or climbing that mountain. But in my opinion, they often fail to see that it's kind of risky to just cross the street and like down here and this, in this middle of the city as well, right? It's kind of risky to, head out with your friends and drink alcohol and be drunk at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. as well in the middle of the city or in Stockholm, right? So, what are your thoughts about like risks like mountain climbing versus living in the middle of Stockholm and heading out at 2 a.m. Drinking, going for drinks?
Yeah, we could probably extend this podcast with several hours if
Yeah,
we dig deep down. But
yeah,
in somehow to convey a summarized version of this, I think we have to separate two things. One thing is that climbing is voluntary, coming down is mandatory. So climbing is voluntarily and not necessarily going from A to B using commute transportation in the cities and the urban environments. It's something that is necessary. Otherwise, you cannot live, or you know, you you got to feed yourself, and you got to put food on the table, and that requires that you work. So it's hard to uh, circumnavigate the necessity of public transportation. And of course, if you bike, there is statistics that show that it has some sort of plausibility that you will end up at hospital in Stockholm. It happens every day. And but should you stop biking because of that? No, people don't. But you know that climbing Mount Everest or Annapurna, which is the deadliest 8,000-meter peak in the world, which I've been to in wintertime, should we stop climbing that? Well, do I ask yourself, is it necessarily for me to sustain my life? Probably not. Would it enhance my life? For a great deal, but it could also devastate my life, which somehow 8,000-meter peaks also have contributed to. I've ended up in hospitals due to stomach bugs, amoebas, and dysentery and Shigella. I've been puking and shitting myself at the same time, peeing blood. It's been absolutely horrible. And the sanitation and hygiene on these mountains are constantly deteriorating due to human traffic in these areas. There's so much human people, so many people trafficking these areas, and also horses and mules and donkeys, that there's too much feces around, which makes these areas um, um, it's horrible. It's disgusting, and so therefore you have to take precautions. And how do you do that? Well, you try to plan, you're trying to mitigate, etc. But there's always a risk. There's always a risk. And by mitigating everything, you also um take away some sort of freedom, the freedom that you can feel when you roam in areas, not thinking about your next step all the time, and not thinking catastrophe thoughts, and which can be debilitating in
mm.
some sense, because it is ruining you from the experience of being in the now, and the bliss that we were talking about. So when it comes to risk, I have a very dualistic approach to risk. I mean, you can only know certain things, and it's always easy to look in hindsight what you should have done differently. And looking at K2, for instance, the tragical accident that happened 2008 that
Yeah.
unfortunately took 11 people's lives. There are so many things that I have questioned myself, and have beaten myself up with in hindsight what I should have done differently. I should have been more persistent in trying to convince the people to turn around. I have had nightmares and horrible things happen to me at home that is in the inexplicable, and I've suffered so much. But is that so I have to make a choice. Should I use the information and the insights from that in trying to help me navigate life in the future? Yes. Or should I keep on punishing myself for the misfortunes and the things I didn't know and the things we didn't know then in the future? No, I shouldn't. It's not very happy. That won't make the people and the world happier. So I have to try to put a lid on it and say that enough is enough. Enough of this self-beating, and trying to navigate with what I know now into the future. So when it comes to risk, yes, life is a risk. There's no certainty that we will live tomorrow, and perhaps that is why it's so precious, and that is why it's so adventurous, and that is why we appreciate it so much, because we don't exactly know how it's going to end. And I think that is part of an adventure, because if you could eliminate all risk, would it be an adventure? I don't think so. So I think that don't be um, don't be a fool thinking that everything can kill you. But then again, when you travel and when you make plans, trying to think about the unthinkable and have a backup plan to reassure that you can take care of eventualities and the consequences. That I think is it's very grown up mentality.
Thank you, Fredrik. As you said before, dying is easy, everything else is hard. You're right. And
Yeah.
and you, as I agreed, like heading out on adventures, exploring, discovering it, as you say, and for me, it makes me appreciate life more, right? So I have a few. I'm gonna ask you maybe two more questions. Like time is running as well, and let's see where we end up. But I kind of wanted to show, like this is I will put this on YouTube as well, and otherwise it's an audio podcast. I will, if you're watching on YouTube, you will actually see what I show. But I have a few books about like climbing, so this is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Our Ascent of the Everest, High Adventure, and then Everest 1953. A good one. And then I have the Extreme Eiger. That's a good one. And then I have Touching the Void. That's a good one. And then I have actually this one, Begravda i himlen, as you mentioned, like 2008, right? And the accident that happened 2008. So I'm kind of, maybe if you shared a bit what happened there on, 2008, but I'm also maybe more curious about any maybe more like fond memories, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
of climbing in the mountains, like any mountain really. Maybe if possible, you could paint us a picture of like a good memory you had up in the high mountains for well, I'm super curious, and also for the podcast listener or viewer to, so we are able to almost imagine ourselves being there.
Mm. There are so many, but I have to cherry pick. I think that I have one in mind, and that is in 2010. This was the first return trip to Pakistan after the accident on K2, and I was a bit ambivalent, a bit. I felt uneasy about returning because I didn't know how to react when I saw K2 again. But there was no hard feelings. There was no trepidation or regrets or anything like that. It was just this harmonious feeling of almost seeing an old friend again. But that wasn't my goal for 2010. It was Gasherbrum 1 and Gasherbrum 2, two solitary peaks that is approached as you walk the Del Toro Glacier coming east and rounding this winding big glacier and ending up on almost 5,000 meters altitude. And I've been successful in Gasherbrum too, and now I was waiting for a weather forecast to improve. But we had these 2 weeks unabated storm that howled over our base camp, and we were trapped inside our tents, and we were trying to sit with all fours on the tent fabric in order for it not to implode. We sat like dogs upside down, sitting with our legs and our hands, and it wasn't getting easier. It was 2 weeks of this notorious wind and snowfall, but then everything disappeared. The winds, the clouds, and it was blue sky, and it was waking up, and we had this snow landscape, powder snow everywhere, and the weather report was extremely promising. So a team set up from different groups. There were some South Koreans and some Nepali people and Pakistani people, and there was me from Sweden, one lone guy from Sweden. And everything was fine. The weather was great. We came to the highest camp at around 7,200 meters, roughly, if I can imagine. We climbed the Japanese Kolar on Gasherbrum 1, which is an 8,000 meter peak. And I remember we sat there early in the morning in the tent, brewing our tea and brewing enough water for the thermoses so we could have it for the climb. And my friend from Argentina, Maximo, he threw in the towel. He wasn't sure about the weather, and it wasn't looking promising again. It was started snowing outside. It was bad visibility. But I thought to myself, let's give it a shot. I can always return back to the tent. So I took my stuff, I took my backpack in the middle of the night. And it's funny when you're climbing with a headlamp, it's like being in a fishbowl because it's like having two walls on both sides of your pathway and everything else doesn't exist. It's funny. You're in this vast mountain with so much space and dimensions everywhere, but you have this flashlight that restricts your viewpoint to what you have in front of you. And it was getting steeper. People were having second thoughts about the other teams. So I took the lead with the rope and I was leading up, navigating because my navigational skills is quite inept. I've been running orienteering for many years. So I was leading the group in this thin air, and sunlight was starting to shine through the clouds and the fog, but we couldn't see the sun. We hardly saw anything. It was visibility for maybe 5 meters. But we eventually got to the ridge, and some of my friends there, they thought they were actually the summit. So they were congratulating each other, celebrating, yeehaw! But I started climbing further up. And at a point, I thought it was so ridiculous because everyone's standing under me, celebrating that they were on the summit. And I waved to them and said, guys, hello. And I was probably 20 meters above them. And they saw me and their cherishing voices subdued and dissipated. And they started climbing again. But I was already in front and I was like a machine. I wanted to get to the top of this thing. And it's a sharp, thin ridge where you actually, it's hard to step on either side. So I was sliding on the summit ridge with one leg on the one side of the mountain and the other leg on the other side of the mountain. And I eventually got to the top and something miraculously happened. From being no visibility, suddenly the sky opened up I'm not religious, but sure as hell I was religious at this point because it felt like God's light was shining on me and everything just blew away the clouds, everything in a matter of minutes. And I could see the Karakoram, the jagged black shaped peaks in the west and the Tibetan plateau, more brownish color in the east. It was a sight to behold. It was perfect. And I sat there and I filmed myself and I was so jubilant. And eventually my friends started popping up around the ridge and they came forward. And I said, thank you, thank you, thank you, probably 20 times, repeating and iterating the word thankfulness so many times because there were so many things to be thankful of. And this story is very close at my heart because there's so many things that we should be thankful for, but the things we take for granted. And waking up every morning or going to bed every night and starting or finishing the day by telling yourself what you are thankful for, I think will put a big smile on your cheek and will make you sleep better. Because the futile things that doesn't go your way and the things that didn't work out, sure as hell they can mess up your life. But for God's sake, do not miss out on the larger picture for the things that we take for granted, but the things that we should be thankful for.
Thank you, Fredrik. I felt shivering a bit. Like shivers. That was really nice actually. Thank you for painting that picture. Um Maybe even like for podcast the listeners like listening on an audiobook, and you hear this painting of that landscape and everything. That was beautiful. Um I sort of have, but you did sort of answer that question, I had like a final question. Maybe if possible, and also for the listeners and the viewers, I will add links and stuff so you can find Fredrik. Obviously, goes without saying. I'm a bit curious about like mindset and goal setting, but maybe that's like a big topic, right? And let's round it off a bit. But maybe if you have like a final message to the listeners and the viewers that maybe involves goal setting, that could be something, right? So I give the last few words to you, Fredrik, and
Oh, there's so
there you
many
go.
quotations that I could name drop, but that's gonna feel a bit cheesy. But I think that one have to be reminded of that high high goals, audacious goals, and lofty goals require bold action. And I think August Strindberg, famous Swedish writer, he put it quite nicely. Life is not for amateurs. And I think that this is not an amateurish thing. You really need to propel yourself to excellence. What can I do every single day that moves me forward, that moves my ass forward? How do I gain more competence, insights? What information am I assimilating? What material am I digesting? And how do I train? Because just doing random movements and going to the gym, well, that's better than nothing. But you have to have a plan and you have to execute your plan. So, with all these thoughts, let me round off by saying that I think that every fucking day when you wake up is your New Year's Eve resolution. Every day. It's not one time every year, but every single day is your New Year's Eve resolution. And if you wake up, for God's sake, start by putting positive energy as early as possible in the morning. Do not start by scrolling the news because the news will not get you in a positive mood. Instead, meditate. go out, and if you can see the sun, if the sun is out, get sunlight on your face the first thing in the morning, or take a couple of deep breaths, do your 50 push-ups, do your 50 air squats, and then listen to an empowering podcast like yours, Erik, and listen to people who share their life experiences, and boost your mornings with positive energy so you can tackle the things that are not so easy.
Thank you, Fredrik. It was a blast to have you as a guest on the podcast The Quest. And I hope for the listeners, if you listen all the way to the end of this podcast and you didn't like stop in the middle to head out running or cycle, whatever you do, that is also fine. That is a big goal, actually. But if you listen to until the end of this podcast, I hope that now after the podcast ends, then you will head out and do your thing. Thank you, Fredrik, for being a guest.
Thank you, Erik, for the opportunity.
And that is the wrap up for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can find me on all main social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, even on LinkedIn under the Primal Swede. Okay, so follow me there for behind the scenes content from the podcast, but also where I share more info about nutrition, fitness, endurance, bikepacking, and all of these things, adventure. Right? About the podcast itself, make sure to subscribe and follow the podcast. I'm on all main podcast platforms like iTunes, Spotify, and so on, okay? If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to me on YouTube as well so you don't miss anything else I put on my YouTube channel. Okay. So now to finish this off, I really hope you got value and inspiration, and just one final thing. Stay strong, kick ass, and be a beast, my friend. Go after your dreams, chase your dreams, never give up. Cheers. Bye.